Once you are self-aware, you must make a change.
Welcome to the Millionaire Woman Show, where we'll be discussing leadership, business, human potential, inspiring you to live rich from the inside out. Unlock your creativity, stretch out of your comfort zone, break through your barriers, take inspired action, and achieve epic results. Now here's your host, 3-time best-selling author, speaker, and certified executive coach, Debra Kasowski.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another Millionaire Woman Show. And if it's your first time here, welcome. You're in for a treat. We get you guests from around the world who will motivate you in life, business, and leadership. And today, I have a special guest. It's kind of like turning the tables. I have the wife of the Iron Cowboy, and James Lawrence, who did the 50-50-50, so 50 triathlons, 50 states. It's 50 Ironmans. Make sure I qualify this because that is definitely a strong feat in itself. And 50 days, 50 states. And I am so excited to have Sunny Joe here. She's a Utah native, college graduate from Utah Valley University in the field of psychology. She married James in December 2000, so we're coming up to a 20-year anniversary. And they're loving life together. They have 5 kids, 4 daughters with a son on the end. And she's always loved being a mom, as well as James' #1 supporter through all of his accomplishments. They balance each other out and they make a great team. So I'm excited to have this conversation with her because now it's an exciting time for her to start her own career, heading into the second half of her life. And she's passionate about people, loving to get to know anyone that they come across. She comes and crossing paths, and she's regularly told that she's a ray of sunshine that matches personality with her beautiful name, Sunny Joe. And she's been an athlete for most of the years of her life and have enjoyed calm down version now that she's entering this new chapter. Golf has waited for many years, so now it's something she loves to do, and she's got some hot pink golf shoes. Please welcome Sunny Joe to the show.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for joining me. I had heard of James from a couple of friends when I had been starting some triathlons, and I had won tickets actually to an event that he was speaking at here in Edmonton, Alberta. And I was sitting in the audience because one of the things I've done triathlon, have not entertained up to an Ironman or even a half Ironman because of the open water swimming. And one of the questions I had asked him when we had the Q&A portion was, how do you get over thinking that there's something underneath you or that it goes dark and then you don't have that visual? And, and through reading the book and some of the other challenges that I've gone through, I'm ready to make an attempt to just do an open water swim just for myself, to know that I can do that part. So it's been on my list of things to conquer. And, but today I want to just focus. There's so much I have had going through my head of wanting to ask you. First of all, when he comes and tells you that he's going to do this 50 Ironman, 50 days, 50 states, what was your first reaction?
Well, the interesting thing is when I married James, I knew he was a dreamer. And so I have to be honest when I say that all of his ideas never come as a surprise to me. So even when they're extreme, I just expect them. So for this one, it was a unique circumstance because he had not quite finished his 2012 world records yet. And he was doing 30 full Ironman triathlons through 11 countries in that calendar year. So he had 2 races left to finish off that world record. And he said to me, I have an idea. And I was like, oh no, because it had been a very hard year for our family. And my kids were still really little. And I mean, a very hard year. And I couldn't believe that he was already moving on when I was still trying to make it through, the last few races of that year. And so I told him it was about the middle of November. And I told him that he had to wait till February. I said, we got to finish this world record. We got to get through the holidays. you can't talk to me till February. So he tried a couple times, and then finally he popped in on February 1st and said, it's February, we have to talk about it. So he'd originally wanted to do it in 2014, but we were already into February of 2013. And I thought there was no way we could be prepared in 1 year, less than a year to start that. So I begged him and gave my well wishes if it was 2015. And he complied. And that gave us time to get the complexity of that pulled together a little more easily. I mean, there's no way we could have done it in 10 months. We barely pulled it off in 2 years, right? 2.5. I mean, we didn't start till June, so it was almost 2.5 years by the time that we actually executed it. So that one caught me off guard a little bit, but for the most part, he's got all sorts of ideas going through his head, so nothing really surprises me.
So you're kind of the steady to his popcorn ideas that come up.
I say that he's got a handful of helium balloons, and I'm holding onto his feet and saying, okay, you can go up, but you got to stay down also. So that's how I describe our relationship. James is floating up with these helium balloons, and I'm like, okay, think about the logical things in life. So we make a really great team.
Yeah, very nice balance there. How does it make you feel? Because I know I'm just going to show everybody the cover, the Iron Cowboy Redefine Impossible. Let me hold it this way. There we go. And one of the things that really intrigues me is you're really the one who instigated this whole thing. Because he never ran before until you got him running, and then it took off from there, from the next challenge to the next challenge. And when you think about it, that it just took one thing to trigger that.
Yeah, one really simple thing too. It's funny because I've always been extremely athletic, and my friends, even from childhood, always tease me that I had all this talent, but I didn't have a single ounce of competition in my body. And so, they would joke that my athletic abilities went to waste because I didn't care to use them other than to goof off and have fun. So I started getting fat as a freshman in high school and was like, holy cow, well, I don't know what else to do but start running, because I'd been a gymnast for years, and I'd always been super active. And then all of a sudden I'm going through puberty and my body's changing and I'm gaining weight, and I'm like, whoa, what's happening to this, athletic body of mine that's transforming into this woman? So I started running. And I just ran for fitness, and I'd always been into weights and all sorts of stuff. I lied for my first gym pass. I was 15 and said I was 16 so that I could get it, because it was a few months before my birthday. But I'd always loved fitness. So James and I were married, and he was a guy who would go hit the weights at the gym. And I'd say, yeah, weights are important, but you also got to be doing something for your lungs and your heart. And he's like, that's sissy stuff. Who needs that? So I said to him, okay, great. Well, every year I run this race on Thanksgiving morning. And I felt like it was a kind of a fun way to launch off the holiday. And it's just at the, the local fitness center. And it's just a 4-mile run. And so I did it every single year. And I said to him, why don't you come this year? And we could push the kids in a stroller, or, we could figure out how to make it work. And he's like, oh yeah, no problem. Well, he and his buddy Mike show up and nearly die at this 4 miles. So the finish line, I was like, you guys are pathetic. I'm like, you're 28 years old and you think you're these athletic specimens, and you nearly died. I joke, we all joke that James had women passing him with babies in strollers, because Mike ended up walking like half of it, I think. So at that point I said, this guy needs a kick in the pants. And so I said, hey, I signed us up for the Salt Lake City Marathon. And that was in April of 2015. So this is just the holidays before. I said, I signed us up, so figure it out. Because I knew he would do his thing and I would do mine. And so he and Mike got this great training plan. And I remember one day they came in and they said, oh, we did this long run. We ran 6 miles today. And I was like, 6 miles? That's like less than an hour. And I didn't have a running background. I'd always just run for fitness, but I knew 6 miles wasn't very long. So it was fun to watch them into this journey of mileage, so to speak, where, they kind of conquered some of these longer distances. And then the day of the race, everybody did their own thing, and it was our first marathon. So we all fell apart and made stupid decisions throughout the whole race, and James crossed that finish line. And I remember we went to Cracker Barrel on the way home, and we were all sitting there like, we are never doing that again. It was the most miserable thing ever. And the next morning I went to church. James couldn't get out of bed, The night before he'd gone to these fights with a friend, and his legs had locked up in the bent knee position, and he had to be wheelchaired out. And so at church they said, does anybody have any good news? And I said, yeah, I ran a marathon yesterday, me and James. And I said, he beat me, but I can walk today and he can't. So that's always kind of like one of the funny things that, he may have finished it 20 minutes faster, but he was laid up for like a solid month. And I just couldn't believe it. I was like, you guys are a disaster. So from then, he kind of caught the bug. He had a friend that made a challenge to him with triathlon. And he said, now swimming and biking, that sounds a lot more fun than just running. And so that same summer, he started off and did really well in some local races, and then it took off from there.
That's amazing. That's amazing. I can appreciate the marathon. I just finished my first one ever in 2019.
Don't they hurt so bad?
I was not prepared to know anything about it. People were standing with road signs that said, signs on, I'm praying for your toenails. And I'm like,
what does that even mean?
Toenails. And I'm like, what are they talking about? I'm telling my girlfriend, I said, what are they talking about? She goes, don't worry about it. You'll
just keep running.
Keep running. And that evening, I had come home and my son was like grinning like a Cheshire cat. He's like, hey, Mom, you need to have 20 minutes ice, 20 minutes hot tub. Stay in your marathon clothes and hop in the tub. So he cranks the water, cold, cold, cold. And he comes with this big bowl of ice. And he's looking at me with this big grin. He's like, okay, Mom, ready? Ready? And he's 15. And he's like, he throws it in. I'm like, ooh, and he's just cackling, laughing. And then he said, okay, I'll be back in 20 minutes. I'm going to go get your Tim's tea and your sprinkle donut that you wanted because you finished. And it took all of me to stay in that tub. But that evening when I crawled into bed, I was like, why do my toenails hurt on the top of the sheets that are covered?
The sheet rubs them, right? Yes. Yeah.
I thought, okay, I'm just going to take a nail file and just poke, like maybe there's something there. And all of a sudden fluid came out and I was like, oh, and the file went right down to the bed. And I'm like, oh, this is what they were talking about.
This is what that woman's praying for, these toenails.
This is what that sign was. I was listening.
Yes.
And it took, I think 9 months. Almost a year.
Yeah, because they fall off and then they got to get better and then they got to grow back. And James, he has a hammer toe that he always has problems with. So he loves it when it falls off at the beginning of the season because then it takes 9 months to get back. And so it doesn't bother him the rest of the race season, right? So he likes it when it falls off.
Because I was looking in the book and the butterfly notes about having, I love the toenails that the kids used to think the toenails were the coolest thing ever.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, the Happy Father's Day. We love your gross, mangy, hammer toe toenails.
It's like a science experiment, right?
That's a fact. That's a fact.
So I'm curious, while he was training, while he was in the midst of the Ironman, there's many times like you were really a force in getting him up, exhausted, right? Not feeling like you could even put clothes on and, change for the next part. And so when you saw him in that state, what did you tell yourself about, being the supporter, but also knowing what his vision was for himself?
Well, we're surrounded by a lot of people and a lot of strangers, and everybody there had sympathy and compassion for him because they just could see in his face that no one's home. Right? I mean, you are literally looking through this body into the black hole. Mm-hmm. But for me, I knew what it had taken for us to get there. And I knew James would regret it for the rest of his life if it wasn't accomplished. And so I felt zero compassion. I mean, I just didn't coddle him. I just couldn't. So we would go in one day and everybody would be like, oh, he's too tired to get up. And I was like, he is getting up and he's getting up right now. Right. It's like I had to be the one person that was constant, that I wasn't emotionally swayed side to side. It was like, this was the goal. This is what had to happen. And I knew James would regret it for the rest of his life if I didn't play some sense of hardball. And so, as much as I knew he was struggling, I knew it was self-inflicted. He had chosen this and this was his goal. And also I knew it was temporary. So every day it went through my mind, if he doesn't accomplish this, I have some accountability in it, because I was the person that had to be the drill sergeant to make it happen. And at the time, sometimes I felt bad that I had to be the horse driver, that I had to be, kind of getting in there and making stuff happen. But looking back, one, that's kind of my personality. I'm not like I'm tenderhearted and I'm kind and I'm patient, but I'm not very good at like coddling a person who victimizes themselves.
Mhm.
And so I'm really good at executing a task and making stuff happen. Be straightforward. And James and I had been married for 15 years at that point. That's what he would have expected from me. So if I had been, oh, you better sleep another hour, or he would have been like, are you sick? Who are you, woman? But I knew he would regret it if it didn't happen. And if it didn't happen in some form of the way that he wanted it to happen. And so I felt very strongly that it was my job to keep him on task and keep him on the path, even though that was virtually impossible. I mean, I was like pulling him from left to right. I never got him to go straight, but ultimately I kept him on that path, at least with half a toe, if that's all it was. So,
And would you say for the most part,
the hard part though is I couldn't be like his wife during that time. Like I couldn't be with him and I couldn't comfort him and I couldn't, because we were never together. He was out for the day and I was trying to get everything together. It was utter chaos. So that's the part that I did miss, is I felt like we weren't married and the other people were able to nurture him in that way when I couldn't. And that was really hard for me, because I was like, well, how come I can't be nice and love him and snuggle him and take care of him? How come everybody else is taking care of him when I've been taking care of him for 15 years? So it was kind of like a conundrum between those two forces.
Yeah. And do you find with, the amount of training, I know people say, training for an Ironman is just like, a full-time job. And many people who do participate have full-time jobs. But you have 5 kids. You are starting on your own career, and knowing James, just like before we were talking, he was already, I could, hearing the biking shoes. He's training.
Yeah.
How do you deal with, like you said, there's times I can be the wife and there's times I have to be part of that drill sergeant piece so it doesn't impact your relationship with all that training time. Because I know some people listening, they might have people, dreaming about doing an Ironman, and they're contemplating, or they're holding back on that dream because they think their partner won't be understanding. How do you approach this?
That's an excellent question. And actually, it's a quite fair question, because it is a very demanding sport. I mean, any endurance event is. One of his wingmen, Casey, he's a teacher and he has a lot of young kids, and he does endurance sports as well. And his wife and I are great friends. And it is quite a balance for them, for him to be able to do what he wants to do and work as a teacher and be a father and a husband, and to volunteer in his church and his neighborhood and all these things. And I think the best answer for that is that there's a time and a season. And I can't tell you how many times I was at home. I used to say to James, and he hated it, it hurt his feelings, but it's kind of how I felt. I said, somebody has to be the grown up. Like I have to be the grown up. So he's like, hey, let's go do all these really fun things together. And I'm like, Jay, somebody has to be the grown up. Like if you're out doing these things, I have to be home helping take care of these kids and homework and all these things on top of, and so the answer, I mean, I can't tell you how many times I'm in the living room and they're off going to do these fun things. And I'm sitting there going, I'm doing homework so I can graduate from college with 5 little kids in time to head off for the 50, and they're all out riding bikes, or like a Saturday morning, they're like, let's go do this really fun, long 4-hour trail run. And I'm like, well, I can only go for 2 because I have a family. But the thing is there's a time and a season for everything. And
Mm.
I chose to be a mother and I chose to have 5 kids and I had them in less than 7 years. They're 6.5 years apart, all 5 of them. I chose that. I wanted that. I wanted to be done having kids before I was 30. I had my 5th child at 28 because I knew I would be young and have the energy and to give them my life, and then they would grow up and I would still be young. So a lot of people, they wait to have kids till they're 40. Well, then they get to enjoy their 20s and 30s. Well, I did it reverse because I'm like, well, you're 20, you don't have any money anyway. And, I'd rather do my life later when I have money and I have a husband to do it with versus
Right.
college student funds, at 20 years old. So I waited and I waited my turn for a lot of things and I made tremendous sacrifices to make my own thing happen. But the second you start feeling sorry for yourself and you say, oh, they always get to do this, or oh, they're always doing that, that's when you get yourself in trouble as the partner, as the supporter. Now, as far as James goes, he doesn't plan anything without talking to me first because he has to, just like our friend Ryan, Casey's wife, Casey's like, Ryan, are you willing to make the sacrifices for me to achieve these goals as well? James is like, Sonny, can I do these things? And sometimes I say no. Sometimes I'm like, no. Or I'm like, you can do it, but I don't want you to. So you can make your own choice, but I'm saying it's too much for me to stretch.
Mhm.
So the time in the season, if you're going to choose to do an Ironman, your partner has to know that it's going to be a pretty intense commitment and you got to be in it together. Now, I have to say, I've seen a lot of marriages and families destroyed by these people who become career Ironman athletes because they put the sport first and they walk away from their families and their lives explode. And that's the truth with anything. It's the truth with work, or if you're a golfer, or if you're obsessed with going to CrossFit, or I mean, that's lacking balance in any field or hobby or interest. So, you really have to decide together if it's the right time and the right season. Is this something we're willing to commit to? Is it something we need to wait? Or is now a great time? And I mean, pick one, do one, and then you know what it entails. And then if you decide you want to do another one, now you know what it really entails, right? So
Right.
it's a tight squeeze with a schedule, that's for sure.
And you talk about the power of being in the passenger seat, but I'm also curious as to how James supports you for your dreams as well.
That's a really great question. People say all the time, like, oh, especially when we were younger, we was doing those first world records and stuff. People were like, oh, you're holding down the fort and James is off gallivanting. He's playing and you're working hard. And it was like people tried to talk me into being mad at him. But
Mm.
what they didn't realize is that I am constantly working on my own dreams and aspirations. But because they're not as big as his, people don't know about them. And so they don't realize that he's supporting me through all of those things I do too.
Mm.
So he's saying things like, hey, did you do that thing that you were supposed to do today? Or hey, did you decide you want to take piano lessons again? Did you talk to the person? Did you get it arranged? So he always is supporting me. I went back to school with 5 little kids, caring for a woman with Alzheimer's. And like my son was like 4. I had to take him to class with me sometimes. And James literally pulled his load. He would help drive kids, he would take kids, and he's getting ready for the 50. At the same time, he's doing what he can to simplify my life in going back to college at the most random time. I graduated 10 days before we left for the 50. And he could
Wow.
have easily said, it's not the right time. What are you thinking, lady?
Yeah.
Instead, he's like, are you seriously going to dive into this right now? And I'm like, yeah. He's like, okay, then giddy up. So he's really good about supporting me, the stuff I want to do. I just am not as adventurous. And so I think his support isn't demonstrated as well as mine is.
I think going back to school is very adventurous at any age.
It's
Uh,
conventional, though.
yeah, no,
It's
I get what you're
conventional.
saying, and what I also hear is a real ebb and flow of communication,
Yeah,
but also saying, okay, that's what you're choosing. Let's find a way to make it work. There isn't that, oh, are you sure you want to do this?
never.
Maybe it's not the right time for you, or kind of like he doesn't come from a place of sabotage, and neither you for him. It's like let's figure out how.
Well, I did a video on my Instagram on Monday about hijacking. And it's like, I think about it a lot because people tend to hijack somebody else's moment. So, for instance, when you talk about sabotaging each other, a partner or a friend or a sibling or a parent might say, well, I don't want you to do this great thing because then it makes me feel bad about myself. So I'm going to hijack your moment and I'm going to make it about me and about how it's the wrong time for you because it makes me feel inadequate.
Yeah.
And it's like hijacking is so common in society that everybody thinks that somebody else's success takes away from them. And so, it's sometimes in a partnership or in a friendship, any type of relationship that is impacted. And the term I've chosen to use for that is hijacking. Like, don't let other people hijack your moment or your dreams because they're yours, right?
Yeah, I think that's so important. That's why, I really admire the work, because marriage is work. I really admire the work that you have worked together in ensuring that, if that's your dream, I want to support you 100% in any way that I can. And how you said you don't have to be the driver. You can have power in the passenger seat, especially if someone's secure with who they are, and that's really what it comes down to, not letting the ego take over.
Totally.
Where that
Well, and I like to say, in the passenger seat, I get to take a nap when I want, and I get to control the radio, and I can read a book, or I could anything I want. Where the driver, they've got to be like on all the time. And for some reason, people think, well, I want to be the driver. I don't want to be the passenger. I'm like, who wants to be the driver? Are you kidding me? It's so restrictive. I get to be the passenger, and I get to enjoy all these adventures with James, and I don't have to do any of them. Are you kidding me? Like, so people think, oh, but that takes away, back to the ego, that takes away from me. I'm like, James's success has nothing to do with my self-worth or my value. It's my responsibility to decide what I want to do with my life and who I want to be and to execute that. And even if I don't have his support, sometimes you're in a relationship. I mean, James didn't have support when he first started doing this. Everybody was against him. Yeah. And sometimes when you know it's the right thing to do, you don't have the support you need and you want. So it's tricky, but you have to remember too that along with supporting James, I am the first person to say no, or that's a bad idea, or yeah, you say you're going to do that, but are you actually going to do it? And if you are, you're committing to me right here and I'm holding you to it. So it's both sides, right? It's not just like, yay, you're so awesome, but it's also like, no, you are not doing what you said you were going to do, and I'm holding you to it. So it's like, again, just like the 50, right? I had to be the drill sergeant, but then I also got to be the person who loves him the most out of everybody there. Right. So that's our marriage for sure. That's our marriage for sure.
Sunny Joe, I think what I really hear from you is that you were calling out any excuses. It doesn't sound like he comes up with a lot, but when they do, you're able to hold him accountable, and he's like, oh, she's calling me on it, kind of thing. It's not like,
and he knows I will.
Yeah. And he's not
even attempt it. I'm coming.
Has he ever gotten defensive to say, oh no?
Always. He always does. Always. Are you kidding me? I have to say to myself, okay, this is what I want to say, but how do I actually need to say it? Right? Yeah. So something else I like to say is people are always offering explanations, but really explanations are just excuses. Yeah. An explanation is, I left the iron on this shirt and the shirt lit on fire. The explanation is I left the iron on. But that's not how we use explanations today. Everybody's always offering excuses, right? So whenever my kids try to explain something, I always say, is this an explanation or is this an excuse? And I don't get a lot of excuses in this house. So
yeah. And I love it because I remember the part where Lucy was asking him to, what was a cartwheel across the finish line. And and he was like, okay, I gotta find a way to have enough energy to do this, right? To call each other on excuses and being.
Yeah, she was not giving him an out. No, right? No out.
She must have learned that from you. I'm assuming.
Maybe, her personality is a lot like mine. She's funny because she was just working a job and she is like, they're disorganized and they're this and that and so frustrated. And she's just like right up in there, saying, hey, this and this and this. And I was like, awesome. Good for you for speaking your mind. But just remember, sometimes you have to stop and say, this is how I want to say it. How should I actually say it?
Yeah.
So she definitely has a bold personality.
The other thing part I want to touch on is, you said when we have all these naysayers and the people who may come across as, the hijackers, um, but also internally, like we have our own doubts of our own, right? Regardless, we don't, if we take on other people's doubt in us or the naysaying, it just makes that weight extra heavy. How have you helped James, but also yourself, to push through when times felt the toughest?
Well, I'm a very spiritual and religious person, so I rely a lot on God and faith. Through these journeys, I knew through my own prayer and revelation that this is what we were supposed to be doing. So when things got hard, I knew God was standing by us, or He would have never told me to do it, right? But the other part is that when I was younger, it was like when I was really young, I was really rough and I was really crazy. I was 7 of 8 kids, and I think I just really had to fight for my place to be heard and seen, and it was really wild. And then as I got older into teenage age, I kind of went the opposite direction, where the pendulum swung way too far, and it was all about pleasing others and being kind and getting walked on. And that's when I learned a lot about life, is through my 20s and 30s. Not even like, I mean, I'm only 39, but like my early 30s before the 50, I used to just always want everybody to be happy and get along and just be best friends. Like I couldn't understand why you would ever try to sabotage or hijack somebody else's journey. I couldn't understand why people wouldn't be friends with that weird person just because they're weird. So what if they're weird? Like, be friends with them anyway. You don't have to like hang out with them every day, but why can't you just be friends with them,
Yeah.
And as I've gotten older, and through the 50 for sure, I've come to realize that, you know, you can't please everyone, so you got to please yourself. Like, you literally will never convince people about certain things. I mean, whether it's who should be the president of the United States or how they can improve their relationships, if people aren't ready to hear you, you
Mhm.
are wasting your energy. And so when I reflect back on the people who were naysayers through our journey, now that it's been so many years and I see how their outcome of life has turned out, it doesn't surprise me based on the people they were 5 years ago and 10 years ago. You're
Right.
like, oh, because when you're 20, everybody smokes and drinks and stays up all night and everybody's the same. But then when you're 40, you know who smoked and drank and stayed up all night in their 20s and who didn't, right? So
Yeah.
now that we're heading into later into life, you're realizing whose choices have taken them to what place.
Mm.
And through that time when I had all those people that were haters, I just couldn't digest how they could be so cruel. But I just constantly dealt with my emotions, and I constantly focused on what I knew we were supposed to be doing. And James and I really had to lean on each other because there were many, many years when we had no one else. And it was a beautiful thing for our relationship to really bring us together. But at the same time, we lost a lot of friends
Mm.
because people just are grumpy. So it was dealing with those emotions at the time and saying, this isn't about me. These are hijackers. They're trying to steal the moment from us. And, I say that more casually than it really was. There were some relationships that, like, even dealing with my emotions through therapeutic processes, it still took me like 2 years to get over some stuff because I just wanted everybody to get along. But everybody has an opinion, and whether you ask for it or not, you're going to get it. So you have to stay focused on what you know is important, and you have to stand by and cling to the people who are your greatest allies and your greatest advocates, because no other opinion matters. That was a really long explanation.
No, that's perfect. And I'm just thinking of, some of the couples out there that might struggle because you have a very unified unit, which is beautiful. And it's a great example for people to understand that you work together as a team. You're very focused. But I know that there's also those couples out there where one partner doesn't believe in the other person's dream and is going to do whatever it takes to, not let them have that spotlight or, um, come up with reasons why they can't succeed.
We come across that a lot, where James and I will counsel with people, and they say, I really want to do this thing, my husband doesn't support me, or I really want to do this thing, and I think that's so incredibly individual that it's hard to even address it, because we know people who have set big goals and they've jeopardized everything for it, and they sucked at it and everything fell apart. So it's like,
Yeah.
do you keep telling that guy to keep going for his dream? Or we know people who, just as a side job, they want to do something, and their spouse is like, well, I don't want you taking time away from the family. And it's like, well, this guy is willing, or this girl is willing to burn the candle from both ends to figure this out, but they don't have that support.
Yeah.
So with it, to me, when I think about it as generally as I can, blanket statement as I can, it's really about deciding if it's the right dream for you together. And if it's not, either that means it's not time for the dream. It maybe means that you aren't that great of a couple, that things aren't working out, that maybe you need to get some therapy and some counseling to figure that out. It might mean that you can bolster your partner up to help them achieve their dreams so that they don't try to prevent you from achieving yours. Kind of like, well, let's both pick a dream. Let's both work on it together.
Yeah.
So you'd really have to think about your own relationship. But I will tell you this, it wasn't always, James and I, the first 10 years of our marriage was really hard. And I prayed every day that we would grow closer. And it wasn't until our world came crashing and burning that we finally learned to pull together and to lean on each other. So that was 10 years into our marriage before we really kind of figured that out and learned how to lean on each other. So it takes time and it takes effort is the most important thing. And, it's so individual that I really hope that you can identify in your relationships what it is.
Yeah.
Yeah,
it totally is very individual, that people need to take time to reflect, because obviously it's much better when each other, in that unit can support each other's dreams, and, be the best cheerleader for each other, and be that sergeant there when holding them.
Yeah. Hold them to it.
Yeah. Hold them to it. And that accountability is huge. Now, I also love the part where, because you were so strong on him and holding him accountable and getting him up. I think one of my favorite lines is, I don't deserve this woman, in the book. And it really speaks to how you have been such a leader, how you have not only just led your family, Sonny Joe, but led, been the instigator of this, planted the seed of this career for what James has embarking. Now I'd love to talk about, how are you dealing with your transition? I know the training's never over, but dealing with your transition to creating this new chapter for your own life.
This is a straight up midlife crisis that people talk about in the movies. I'm like, nobody needs me or wants anything anymore. What do I do? And, back those days in my 20s when everybody's doing all these fun things and I couldn't do it because I had all these little kids, I'm like, one day I'm going to be able to do all this stuff. And now I'm there and I'm like, those are dumb. I don't want to do any of those things. I'm like, I don't want to go get lost in the mountain for 8 hours. I'm good with like an hour and a half hike. I don't need 8 hours in the mountains.
Yeah.
But it was really an interesting transition because there were so many things happening at once. It was like coming home from the 50 and trying to get our lives back established, and James being whisked away and traveling all over the world and speaking, and my kids transitioning into older, more independent per se, but emotionally more dependent. When you have 4 teenage girls with different personalities, they all have different needs. And so I found that I was needed the same, but in a different way as the kids got older. And so it wasn't quite what I had imagined it would be. But now everybody is kind of doing their own thing. And I'm like, well, what do I want to do? I'm all excited. Like, I was waiting for this time for everybody to be independent. And now I'm here and I'm like, okay, what do I want to do? And I'm not quite there yet because my son's still young. He's only 11. So I'm not ready to like dive into anything hardcore yet. But I want to plan now and start building. So in 5 years, I'm ready to pull that bow and arrow back and let it go. So it's been really exciting to see the type of opportunities that come up, because as soon as I open my channels and say, I'm ready world. I'm ready, universe.
Yeah.
That's when stuff starts to pour in. So if you're closed off and you're like, I'm scared, I don't know if I can do it, I'm not good enough, I'll never be able to do what she can do, then the channels are shut, right? And they're like, oh, okay, your sign's closed, so we'll go to the next guy. But as soon as you open your channels, not only do amazing opportunities come, but they're really distinctive and unique to you. It's not like all of a sudden this opportunity comes for me to come get a job at Walmart. That's not unique and that's not distinctive to me.
No.
That's not the type of opportunity I'm talking about. I'm talking about the people I meet and the positions I'm put in, and as far as like where I'm at in line or who I bump into or things like that, that now it's been really exciting. And something I've paid attention to over the last few years is the things people say to me about me. So I hear people say all the time, like, oh, you should do this and you should do this, or you'd be really great at this. And so I've kind of made a mental note and said, well, is that something I'd want to do? People are telling me that's something I'd be really great at. And I've been analyzing all this feedback I'm getting from the world and from the people in my life to see kind of where my puzzle pieces are fitting. So I think the most exciting thing is not knowing. So for now, it's taking all those puzzle pieces and slowly constructing this border of my puzzle, and then knowing when the time is right, everything's going to start filling in. And slowly I'll start to get a picture, and then I'll go, oh, I see what's happening here. Now I know exactly where to put these pieces. But I love that I don't totally know yet. And I'm just waiting for pieces.
It sounds so exciting. So what lights you up?
What's that?
What lights you up right now?
I've always loved connecting with people. I've always been a people person. James has always been, he's a total introvert. And that's what makes his story so amusing is now he's a professional speaker and he travels all over the world and stands in front of all these people. And at first he was like, I'm going to die. This should be you up here entertaining all these people, making them laugh. And he's trying to find his place in this new career that he's kind of fallen into, But he's not as much a people person. He's definitely a more closed up, where I'm like, I want to meet everybody. I want to know all about your lives. I want to surprise you and bring you a treat on your birthday. Like, I just love people. And so connecting with people in different realms, I do energy work with a bunch of people, and, visiting with people at a grocery store or connecting with old friends. I love touching base with old friends and saying, hey, we haven't talked in 10 years. Let's get together and have lunch. Or even deepening the relationships I have. People. I want to go everywhere and meet everyone. It's this chronic thing. So that's what lights me up, is connecting with people.
I love it, because I think there's so much for us to explore in this world.
Yeah.
If we don't dive in, we're going to be missing it. That's my philosophy.
Can you imagine missing out all the things you've learned in your life because you were like withdrawn or something?
Yeah.
It's crazy.
Yeah. No, I think we have to hook up.
Let's get together.
I like
Do you live in Edmonton or like Calgary area?
Edmonton.
Oh, okay. So winter's found you.
Yeah. Well, we have no snow right now. We had a few weeks ago, and it's gone. But it's going to rear its head again here probably in the next week.
It was like 15, 20 degrees today.
Oh,
like I ran in tank top and shorts.
Oh yeah, no shorts here. But
I think we have snow coming on Sunday, but it comes and goes through November.
Yeah,
so
yeah. Well, if you ever go visit down in Calgary, I'll be happy to go meet you. And
you bet. You bet.
Fun things.
As soon as I can cross the border. I tried to go in September. I wanted to go see my sister-in-law, and they're like, you have to quarantine for 2 weeks. I'm like, I was only planning a 3-day trip. I can't quarantine for 2 weeks.
Yeah.
So give me some time. I'll make it up there.
Absolutely. I would love that. That would be so much fun. So, we've talked about transition. We've talked about some of the training. We talk a lot about mindset on the Millionaire Woman Show. And I'm just personally, you've been through quite a journey, the past 20 years. When you think about who you were at 18 and you think about who you are today, and if looking back, what would you tell that 18-year-old self about belief systems, mindset, and getting through some of those tough times?
This is a fabulous question. One, because my daughter just turned 18 last week. And two, because I have been reading through some of my old journals. And, it is a shame to see who I was at 18, not knowing some of the most basic things. And I say a shame, not like it's regret, not like I want someone to blame,
Right.
but I literally had no direction in my life. I didn't know what I wanted to do. I didn't know what I wanted to be. Here it is. I'm a senior in high school, and I've thought of 10 different things I want to be, and I'm making these kind of impulsive choices, like, oh, I'm going to move to Hawaii and live with my brother. And then I'm like, I hate it. I'm coming back. And then I'm going to do this. And just kind of like all over the place, that I really wished I would have had somebody that sat me down and said, hey, what do you actually want out of life? I
Mm.
had no idea. And I think I, had some conventional ideas like, oh, I want to do this and this. And I mean, just your basic answers, D, all the above, right?
Yeah.
But I had no passion for anything other than just fitness, which I didn't necessarily want a career in fitness. I just really enjoyed it. But I had no idea what I wanted to be or what I wanted to do. Or aside from my religious beliefs, I didn't have anything. As I parented my kids, I've made sure that they've really pondered some of the things they'd want to do in their life. Like my son's 11 and he's like, I want to be a streamer and play Fortnite. And I'm like, okay, that's super lame. But if that's what he thinks he wants to do at 11, then I'm like, that's so cool, Quinn. Like, what are 5 different things you want to do? And just talking about the possibility of doing
Mm.
all of them or any of them.
Yeah.
Because even at his young age, my daughter at 14, talking about college already and like, what kinds of things interest you? What kinds of things do you think would be interesting to learn about or to expand your knowledge? Because I didn't really have that. Even though it kind of would seem like I did, I didn't. And so that's been really important to me to pass down,
Mm.
to help my kids with, to help them find some directions with what's important to them. Not what's conventional, not what sounds important or responsible, but what really gets them excited. So that's definitely, I think all the time, I'm like, I wish I could have just sat down with my 18-year-old self and given her a hug and been like, let's just talk. Who do you want to be? Who are you? What are your strengths? What are your weaknesses? That's something that I wish I had known at a younger age.
And I find it fascinating because I grew up in a small town, and we did these career tests, and it said I could be a mortician, a teacher, but the primary things that I knew is doctor, lawyer, teacher, secretary.
Yeah, policeman, right?
Right.
Yeah,
You go to
exactly.
university and you hear about all these other titles that I didn't even know existed. I didn't know what an engineer was.
Yeah.
And I was like, all of this, it just opens up. And I love how you said earlier, when we're open to the possibility versus closing down the channels that are coming to us, how is it that we can prepare for the opportunities in front of us that we
And
don't
that's
even
why they
know about?
that's why they make you take all those 10-10 classes in college, right? They're like, you think you want to do this thing, but we're going to give you a little taste of all these different subjects
Yeah,
because otherwise you may not even know they exist. Why would we know what an
exactly.
engineer is?
Yeah.
I'm like, I was too poor for a pool or a hot tub or a bike or anything. I didn't have anything that was actually built. Just kidding. I did. But
Yeah.
it's like, why would we know, right?
Yeah. And it's fascinating. Like there's so many things like I would love to tell the university systems, that they should,
Yeah.
because when I was in my second year university, had taken, what was it, 5 science courses, all with labs, burning myself out. And I go to see an advisor and they said, why didn't you take swimming? Why didn't you take something to balance this?
Yeah.
And I'm like, look, I grew up on a farm. I'm putting out good money for my course. But
I'm
nobody,
not wasting on jewelry, right?
exactly, nobody
Yeah.
taught me how to play the game.
Yeah.
Right. And it truly is the game of life, right? Making sure that you have balanced activity, making sure that you have things that come easier to you, not just all the hard stuff all the time.
Yes, yes. Well, and that reminds me of another point too, about adaptability, because the jobs my children will probably have don't even exist today.
Yeah.
They're going to be made up in 10 years, and it's going to be a private shopper. I mean, I order my groceries and they show up at my door.
Yeah.
That job did not exist 10 years ago. So, how many ideas do we have in our head that are going to adapt. So the idea is you got to have some type of a goal, but you got to be willing to like let it sway so that when your channel's open and these wild opportunities come up and there's this made up job where you do podcasts on YouTube that did not exist when you were a little girl,
Yeah.
you say, I'm ready. Yeah, let's do this thing. As opposed to like, nope, I said I was going to be a teacher. And so I'm sticking to being a teacher. But there's so many things out there we know, we don't even know exist. They're like these made up jobs. Like they're fake jobs that make you lots of money.
True
And
enough.
and our kids don't know about that unless we tell them, right?
Yes, yes.
So be flexible and dream big of made up jobs because they're out there. They're not even real. And these people are making a ton of money doing them.
Yeah. Yeah. And then when you explore and, be open to the possibilities. So we're almost near the end of the interview, and I love to ask a couple standard questions.
Sure.
Because it's all about your take and how it's impacted you. So what is one book that has really changed the way you see the world? Been a kind of a guidepost for you to move forward? What is that one book for you?
Well, I never read growing up my whole life. And about 3 years ago, I just started reading and I cannot get enough of it. I will say To Kill a Mockingbird was always my favorite book because I'm fascinated with that time era. But the book that's really touched my heart in the last few years is the story about Bill Marriott and him talking about building his hotel empire. And it is so incredibly amazing, this book. And they talk about his dad was very conventional and he was one who wanted to take all these risks and he worked with his dad, right? And so him and his dad were always fighting about the way to do things. But he talks about his family and his religion and his job and the balance of life. They talk about the recession and how he built this incredible empire of Marriott hotels. And it is such a beautiful book. I mean, it's a biography, but there's so many beautiful, valuable lessons in there that make you feel like you can do anything, but with this tender, hometown, loving nature to them. So that's a book that recently has really touched me that I absolutely loved.
Excellent. That's not a book that has ever come by one of my guests, and I need to read it now.
James is like, get over this Bill Marriott book. I'm like, but I love it. There's so many great things.
Oh, I want to read it. So, our show is based on, the principles of life, leadership, and business. And it's all about helping people live rich from the inside out. What does living rich from the inside out mean to you?
Living rich from the inside out means knowing who you are, knowing your value, knowing your gifts, and surrounding yourself with people who remind you of them. People that hold you to that standard, that are always rooting for you and cheering for you. But they can't do that unless you know them for yourself first. So, what am I good at? What do I love? What makes me happy? How am I going to take over the world with cheer and happiness and joy?
Sunny Joe, this has been such a delight. You do totally match your personality. You are a ray of sunshine. And
Thank you.
I'm grateful to meet you. I'm grateful to have you on the show. Now I got to meet both of you, so I'm truly inspired. How can people stay in touch with you? I'm not even sure if you've been doing that already with Connect.
Besides my personal phone number. So my Instagram and Facebook is Sunny Joe Lawrence, but I have started more of like a business page, and the name for that is Sunny Joe Mama. And the reason why is because when I was little, I said, I'm not going to have my kids call me mom. I'm going to have them call me Sunny Joe Mama. It's MAMA. And so I post different things on my personal page and the business page. So that if you are following both, you don't see the same things. But on the Sunny Joe Mama page, that's where I kind of try to share some of my gifts with the world as opposed to just fun pictures. So
beautiful, beautiful. If you were to leave us with one message that you want to sum up this whole podcast, one message, what would that be?
You can do whatever you want, as long as you're willing to work for it. And you know what? Sometimes the work is hard, sometimes it's easy, but it is always rewarding, and it is never too late. So please do what it is that you want.
And I'm going to put in captions and ensure you're ready to be accountable.
Yeah.
Because
I will keep you accountable.
Absolutely, Sunny Joe, you definitely will. And I love that about you already. Wonderful. Thank you for joining us here on the Millionaire Woman Show. On behalf of Sunny Joe and myself, this has been a jam-packed interview. I hope wherever you are in the world, that if you are driving, obviously you can't take notes. But when you get a chance, watch us on YouTube. Go listen to us again on the podcast player that you're listening to. Take those notes down because she's really dropped a lot of gems for you to really think about, do some reflection, and being open to the channels of possibility of things that are not yet created until you start taking action. I'd also love for you to go over to my website at www.debrakasowski.com, where you can get your free download right now of a 3-part video course of making habits stick, so that you can build focus and consistency into whatever goal it is that you want to create that reality. As Muhammad Gandhi said, be the change you wish to see in the world. And on behalf of Sunny Joe and myself, go out and make today great.